Thank you very much for your time today, Annika. It's much appreciated, and it's lovely to see you again back for our second edition of the COVID vaccinations frequently asked questions. We get a lot here at MSL, people wanting to know about the vaccinations, what they mean for people with MS, and certainly as they've just started rolling out across the country. So can you tell us a little bit about, I'm sure you've been very busy with questions as well too in your clinic.
Yes, we certainly have. And, I guess firstly, thanks for having me back again. And yes, this is certainly the topic of the hour, and it's incredibly important, of course. And so, yes, we are receiving a lot of inquiries around this, and this is something that we are continuously discussing as a team as to how to, address these queries, and also to make sure that when we do so, that we try and give people the best advice, based on the evidence that's out there. That's not always as much as we would like. And then also how we can improve the situation, how can we actually contribute to gathering some evidence around this, because it clearly is a really important topic.
Yeah, for sure. I know that when COVID first came out, there was a lot of sharing in the international MS community from other countries who'd experienced the COVID pandemic before we had in Australia. It really hit them hard. Is that similar with the vaccinations? Have the key neurologists in Australia been in touch with people from Israel and the UK who have given these vaccinations? And is there any particular learnings from that you've heard?
Well, we're expecting all of this information to come through, any day now. I think so far we haven't seen very much trickle through, apart from just, individually, communicating with colleagues overseas who's all, reporting, really nothing out of keeping of what we would expect in general. So mostly saying their patients are doing really well, they're very engaged with the programs. But in terms of hard information, there's not really much. I think some of us may have seen some of the tweeting that happened on Friday with a report coming out of Israel. But I have to say, all we really saw was, two little slides that someone took a photo of in a meeting of 30 or 40 people with MS that colleagues in Israel were reporting on. So it's probably, we don't really know exactly what was in that report, but I'm sure we're going to start seeing snippets of this information coming through very soon. The thing that I think most people might be waiting for is the American Academy of Neurology that's kicking off in a couple of weeks. I think it's just after Easter, and I suspect that we're going to see a lot of reports during that week where scientists will start reporting some of their own little trials. And then we'll have to think about what that really means, because often the data is gathered very fast and it may be very small groups of people. And of course, overseas, the situation is completely different. We have basically people being infected with the virus continuously. There's much higher risk of variants of the virus, and the pressure to vaccinate is really high. So, we are a bit in a different situation here where we are quite protected at the moment.
Yeah, thanks. Certainly what the tweets I've been following and the webcasts from people in the UK seem to be indicative that in terms of safety, which is sort of one of the key issues, there hasn't been any real concerns of safety for vaccinations for people with MS, which is great news. That's certainly been front and centre. And whilst it's we can expect more information, it's good that we've got some trickle through nonetheless, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And can you just
remember as well is that, there's really these vaccines that I know people are worried because it feels that it's been approved very fast. But, the clinical trials were massive, and in the UK and the US, in combination with a few other countries, there's been over 100 million doses now administered of the various vaccines. And there really hasn't been any new side effects reported or anything, of concern. So I think even though that's not specific to people with MS, it is really reassuring. So I think we are in, a good situation that we have all those people ahead of us that's had the vaccine already.
Yes, it is a great situation. And can you just refresh us on what the process for rollout for people with MS will be across Australia?
Well, all people with MS or MS-related disorders, so this would include any of our people listening with neuromyelitis optica or associated disorders, are all in the 1B class of vaccine rollout. So that pretty much means that you're eligible right now to start applying to get your vaccine. So you can have a look on the health.gov.au website for the COVID vaccine in your area and see where it is going to be supplied. You will have to provide some sort of documentation to show that you have an underlying neurological condition. And this could be a range of things. It could be a letter from your GP saying that you've got MS. If you have something on your My Health record, that would be a good enough, a letter to show that you've got the disease as well. And some clinics like our service, for instance, are providing a standard letter as well to confirm people's diagnosis. And once you know where the vaccine is, you could register, and this could be a local hospital. It could be some GP clinics as well. And then the process should be hopefully pretty straightforward and fast from there.
Yeah, it's great. And for people who want a bit more information about that, then we did do a video on the practical Q&As, the practical information last week. And what about, are there different types of vaccinations that people with MS should have? Do they have a choice? And is one going to last longer than the other?
Well, I think we don't, no one's going to get to pick and choose. So I was very proud to get my AstraZeneca vaccine last week, Wednesday. And I think that is probably the one that most people will get, because those are, the one that's now also being manufactured in Melbourne, and that we have the most doses of. I think the main thing to remember is that whichever vaccine you are offered, the ones that are available in Australia are all safe for people with MS, so they're not live vaccines. But I don't think anybody is going to be able to pick and choose. I think it's really important to remember that these vaccines are all achieving with 100% success the goal for which they've been designed, and that is to basically prevent people from getting seriously unwell with the infection. So it's very easy to get caught up in the media talking about, is it 72% effective or 92% effective and things like that. But you have to remember that the Pfizer vaccine and the AstraZeneca vaccine, none of these have been compared directly with each other. So we don't know what's the actual difference and the efficacy of these vaccines. And it's probably very little. The main goal here with the vaccination program is to get as many people vaccinated as possible, whichever vaccine is offered. And the reason for that is that we then will achieve the ability for the Australian population as a whole to combat this infection and to stamp it out and keep it out. So I think it's really important for people not to get too caught up in the media hype about which vaccine to have. They are all really great vaccines, and I think we should be very proud to receive any of them.
I think that there's still questions from people about the safety of one vaccination versus another vaccination. So I think it's really important to hear that message that they are all safe and that they aren't live vaccinations, and that for people with MS, regardless of what treatment they're on.
Yes, it doesn't matter. So if you're not on treatment or with whichever treatment you're on, they're all very safe to receive. And I think, the side effects remain pretty mild. So in most cases, you could get a bit of a sore arm, a headache, feel a bit more tired, and this might be more common after your second dose. So with the Pfizer vaccine, for instance, which there was a very limited supply of, and has really been given so far, I think, to first-line health workers and quarantine workers. That dosing is 3 weeks. There's a dose of, your first dose, and then 3 weeks later you get the second dose. With the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine that most of us will be getting, it's about a 12-week delay between the two doses. And with that second dose, you are probably more likely to get a bit of, mild side effects, which is really common with any type of vaccine.
And do you think, just on that topic, Do you think that people should, is there anything that people should do to be prepared for it, or any management tips that you would suggest that people need to do to help manage side effects? We get questions like, should I prepare to have time off work, or
Yeah, well, look, I think, you know, like, I think it's good to anticipate that you're going to feel a bit sore. And obviously for, you know, our people with MS, you know, having that a bit of extra fatigue or extra pain and extra headache could sometimes just tip you over from being able to manage to not being able to manage and needing a day to rest. So it probably is not a bad idea if you have the ability to time your vaccine so you can, if you do feel a bit crook, that you could have the day after just to rest. But for most people, that shouldn't be necessary. I think it might also be a good idea to actually take some paracetamol before or just after you have the vaccine, so that, you know, when it's sort of really kicking in, then you know, have something on board just to, you know, manage the side effects. And maybe doing that for a day or two if your arm feels sore and you feel a bit tired and achy. So that might not be a bad idea. I think other than that, I don't think there's much else, you know, to do to prepare. It's just to basically, you know, getting yourself there.
And it sounds a bit like they're like most vaccinations. Some people get some side effects, some people don't, and some people have a sore arm and some people don't. And so like the flu vaccination. So speaking of the flu vaccination, is there any requirements around specifically for people with MS? Should they have the flu vaccination as well? How long between the vaccination? What are the thoughts around that?
Yeah. So I think this is a very important point, Jodie. I think we mustn't forget that we're also hitting the flu season. And I think you know, I had my first cold that I've had for a long time recently, because we've just all been so careful with wearing masks and, you know, but the kids will be bringing these viruses home. So I think it's, you know, it's good to remember that we are hitting that time of the year when we all could get colds and coughs and flu. And having your flu vaccination is still highly recommended for everybody with MS. So what the recommendation is that you at least give a break between you having your COVID vaccine and your flu vaccine. And the gap recommended at the moment is 2 weeks. So I think if you, and I think it's mostly just so that we don't confuse side effects really. But I think, you know, so that's the recommendation really. So it might be good to just get those things booked in and, you know, get them out of the way.
Yeah. So if you're having the one that you have, the AstraZeneca one, where you have quite a few weeks between doses, is it a good idea to get the flu vaccination first and then have that in 2 weeks, or does it not particularly matter? Or
it doesn't particularly matter, you know. I think, you know, you probably could just look at your schedule and see when you get, you know, your booking in for your COVID vaccine and then work around that. So the flu vaccine is fairly freely available already. So getting that now might be a good idea, and then getting your booking for your COVID vaccine. But whichever one you get booked in for first, or what you manage to organize, you know, just remember to keep that gap open. It
great.
doesn't affect the efficacy of either vaccine.
We've had a lot of questions still about can the vaccination make MS worse or cause relapse, and that's something that a lot of people are worried about. Is there any new information about that, or what's been the information about that?
Well, the information trickling through so far is still really reassuring. So there hasn't been any reported relapses of MS. I think really right in the beginning, when the vaccines were still in the trial phase, there was a couple of cases of transverse myelitis or inflammation in the spinal cord, which is often a very rare side effect of some vaccines. And in some of those cases, someone had actually had MS as well. Since then, there's really been no additional links between MS type relapses or episodes and these vaccinations. And there's been a couple of really big UK studies that have now shown no association between the vaccines and, you know, other neurological side effects. So this includes transverse myelitis, MS attacks, and also Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is an inflammatory disorder of the peripheral nervous system. So all of it so far has been really reassuring. Often when we're talking about very rare side effects, it is possible for us to have a look and see, you know, are these rare events occurring more than expected, you know, in over a certain time period, especially during a time when, say, COVID is florid in a community or vaccines are being rolled out, you know, and there really hasn't been any increase in these disorders beyond the usual incidence. So where it does occur, where it has occurred so far, it really appears to have been coincidence. So because it is possible, I guess, for rare disorders to happen at the same time. But the information we have so far has been really reassuring.
Great. Good to know that there's nothing new on that front and that they remain safe. And what about, we've also had a lot of questions about the mutation, and some people thinking they should wait for a better vaccination, and will the vaccination cover mutations? And so can you tell us a bit of information about that, and about the way, perhaps simplify how vaccines work to reassure people about that?
Yeah, so there certainly has been a couple of variants that's been of concern emerging in different areas in the world. And I think that, you know, so far it does appear that the vaccines that we'll have in Australia will give us protection against the UK variant, but we don't know yet about what will happen with the variant that's been seen in Brazil. I think that's the one that makes scientists the most worried at the moment, because it could escape the vaccines. However, you know, I think this is going to be an ongoing area where we'll have to wait for more evidence to come to the fore. And I think, you know, it is quite possible that there might be a booster vaccination in a year or so, you know, to say, look, this is now the booster that covers these variants, and we may have to all have that one as well. But the main thing is to get that base vaccine in, because that will give you protection against the most common types of this virus. And it's highly likely that it'll give us protection against serious infection, you know, so getting very unwell, being hospitalized with some of these variants as well. But as to how much protection and what exactly we'll need, we'll still have to wait for that evidence to come through, unfortunately. So we'll have to see how this, you know, how the evidence develops over the next 6 to 12 months, I think. But I think that I'll just sort of add that one of the big things with the variants, and the reason the variants are emerging, is because the infection is running rampage through communities. And it really starts happening when there's no control over the virus. And we've seen that, you know, in the UK, in Brazil, where the virus just spreads through communities, and then that virus is then allowed to mutate. So the only way to prevent these mutations is to keep control of that original infection. And this is why vaccinating a population as much as we can, you know, is the biggest step here, that we can try and limit, you know, the pandemic from keeping, you know, an ongoing thing where we're going to have to battle a new variant every year.
That's a really important bit of information. Thanks to you know, that vaccinations have lots of purposes. They protect you, but they also help reduce the amount of variants that happen by that spread. So thanks, that's great. So some of the other questions that we've had have been around, of course, medications, people with MS on disease-modifying therapies, and the timing of MS medications. I'm sure you've had lots of questions about that in the clinic as well too. So what's the sort of general advice, and is there any specific things that people need to be concerned about or consider when they're thinking about vaccination timing?
Well, I think that, you know, with most of the medications that people would be taking for their MS, there would really be no concerns around timing of the vaccination and your medication. The only medications where I think we, you know, we sort of are thinking a little bit about, should we, you know, think about the timing of a dose of the medication and the vaccination, is really around the medications that have a very long effect on the immune system. So the first one in this group would be cladribine, or Mavenclad. So certainly it looks from the information we have on Mavenclad studies that, you know, if you've had the cladribine or Mavenclad and it's been at least 3 months, that there should be no issues with you having any, with you mounting a response to the vaccine. So remember, it's safe to have it at any point, but, you know, having that vaccine sort of 2 to 3 months after your cladribine dosing might improve the way you would respond to the vaccine. The other medications we think about in a bit more detail about when should someone have the dose in the vaccine is ocrelizumab, and some people might be on rituximab, especially people with neuromyelitis optica. And the reason for this is that these medications deplete B cells, which is responsible for producing antibodies. And these antibodies is what we measure when we sort of decide if someone's actually mounted a response to a vaccine. So I guess I might just backtrack and just remind people that, you know, responding to a vaccine is complex. Our immune systems respond by producing antibodies, and that we can measure in blood. But there's also responses generated by T cells, which is sort of the cells that are actually much more involved in fighting viruses. And those responses are not easily measured. So I think we might all know of people who, you know, have had chicken pox as a child, or they've had all their vaccinations as a child, and then they have boosters and they do their blood tests and they never get a response. They never seem to have any immunity against, say, rubella or German measles, but those people never get German measles, and it's because they have a T cell immune response, and those things are not easy to measure. So I guess, you know, so when we're talking about Ocrevus and rituximab, you know, the response of our immune systems should be enough for us to mount a response to the vaccine. And it does appear, and I think that it's, you know, very true that, you know, the longer it's been since you've had your Ocrevus infusion, the more likely you are to have a response that we can measure in your blood to say, yes, I've mounted a response to the vaccine. The studies that we have on ocrelizumab and rituximab and vaccines there's not a lot of studies, but it does appear that people who have, say, a shot against tetanus or a flu shot, you know, 3 to 4 months after they've had their Ocrevus infusion or a rituximab infusion, will mount a response in antibodies to the vaccine at least 50% of the time. But I think, you know, so we don't know because these things were not measured at earlier time points. I think when people see their neurologists, they're going to get different types of advice. And I think it's probably good to see what your clinician and your clinic advises. And I think it's also good to remember that the reason people are getting different advice is because no one can be 100% sure. And I think that, you know, we have to, you know, just do the best we can with the information we have. Our general advice to our patients at the Alfred is that we should wait 6 weeks after the last infusion, or at least have your dosing 6 weeks before the next infusion. So with the Oxford vaccine or the AstraZeneca vaccine, that would mean if someone has had their infusion in March, that we would like them to, you know, they could start booking in for their Oxford or the AstraZeneca vaccine or any vaccine sort of just after Easter, sort of 6 to 8 weeks later. And that would just give them a better chance of getting a vaccine response. And then to have the next dose in, you know, 3 months later, and to make sure that that dose is at least again 6 to 8 weeks before the next dose of ocrelizumab. Now, we can only do this because we have the luxury in Australia that we don't have a massive amount of COVID in the community. So the risk to our patients of the infection, which is way more than the vaccine or anything else, we definitely want to avoid getting that infection, is not very high at the moment. So we can take a bit of time to space these things a little bit. But there might be, you know, the biggest thing is still to have a go and get that vaccine done. So there is a big effort that Australian neurologists, you know, but myself and Professor Fabian Berlot in Sydney, that we're putting together a research program so we can actually measure and see if people are mounting an immune response. So people with MS on a lot of different disease modifying treatments. So we can actually tell people if they've actually you know, if they've received the vaccine, if it's worked or not. So, we're putting that together at the moment as well.
Great. I'm sure that information will really be able to inform things like boosters and stuff like that, so that when we've got a little bit more, like you said, we do in Australia have the luxury of time, which is not the case in other countries as well too. So hence the different messages related to the different context. So that information and that trial that you're doing is great to be able to inform future boosters and flu vaccination, all the vaccinations that we have so many questions about. So that's great news to hear that.
Yeah.
So thank you for all that information. I'm sure that we're going to keep hearing more information, and I know we've had some questions, but we're almost out of time. Is that right, Alyssa?
Yes, that's right. Now, what we will do is we do have a record of every question that has been provided to us today and through our email as well. So for all those people who've written questions in, we will respond via email after the webinar. You're also free to call us on msconnect on 1800 042 138, Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. as well. And of course, we definitely encourage that if you do need some more information or want to talk about some of this information, to reach out to your support team. Well, thank you very much, Annika. Really appreciate your time. And to our lovely audience, thank you for your time as well.